So we know how to code. Sorry, we don't know how to code. That's why we're here. We know a little bit about Unity, but what is C#? And what is a C# script? This brief video, as I call a Mottzy minute, is going to teach you a little bit about what a C# script is, what it consists of, and how you use it. Here we are back in our IDE called Writer. Once again, I use Writer, which is a tool by JetBrains, and it does cost money. You can also use Visual Studio Code or the free version or paid version of Visual Studio. For our purposes, it doesn't really matter. This is a script. This is called a C# script, or just C# in general. C# is a coding language, so even though Unity calls it a script, a lot of developers coming from different backgrounds might just look at it as C# code. What exactly is code? We see a lot of words here, but what do they mean? For the uninitiated, it might be a little confusing. But first of all, I want to make sure it's clear. Code is not that hard. It really is not. Once you understand how it all fits together, once you get it framed up in your mind, it's not that hard. For a beginner, the most important thing that you can know is where do you write your code and what the heck are you going to write? And I highly suggest finding scripts and stealing them and reading them and rereading them to try and understand. So here's some C# code. Before we talk about all the different words we see, let's talk about what syntax is, which is really, really simple. Code has to be read by a computer. So we have to write it in a way that the computer can read it. So when you look at C# code, there's some things that are good to know. When you see something like this is called a curly bracket. These are like parentheses. When you have a parenthesis, you use it to surround a block of something. So I like to associate code with grammar, which is basic writing. And a parenthesis or a curly brace is used to encapsulate a set of something. In this case, in code, this is used to encapsulate a bigger chunk of something that describes what the code does. Then, of course, we still do have parentheses. Usually parentheses are used to encapsulate something smaller, a little one-liner of something, just like a parenthesis in actual writing where you're doing an aside or a note to the person reading your writing. Next, there's things called keywords. You're going to see a lot of these too. For instance, public, that's a keyword. Class, that's a keyword. You have void, that's a keyword. So there are things in languages that have keywords, and you can always look that up on the internet. A lot of these keywords are very similar across languages, and as you're learning languages, you'll see these sort of keywords. When you look at a C# script in Unity, the best thing to know is that usually a script in your context will be one thing that performs a lot of different actions. C# is what's called an object-oriented programming language. So object-oriented just means, think of anything that's an object in the real world. So a car is an object. A car has a bunch of different functionality. It's got the ability to drive and stop and go. And those are very action-oriented words. And so if you turn that into script, you could have a class that's a car, and the car will have actions. A car might start. There's an action right there. A car might stop. And so on. So very similar, analogous to regular life. And when you talk about the starting of a car, there are things that are going to happen in that car. So when you look at C# script and you're trying to understand this because you're still kind of new to coding, you can look at these things right here. Anything that's got the word void or public in front of it after the class is as an action that the object takes. The name here, the name is the name of the object that you are representing. So I have a car, or I have a cube, or I have a player. And these words right here just tell the engine exactly how it needs to interpret this class. Most of the time, you don't have to worry about this at all. In fact, as a beginner, don't worry about it. Just know public class car, mono behavior is how you start with a Unity definition for your class. And then inside of that is where we go to describe all the different actions that the class can perform. A class is broken down to a few different pieces. You have these actions, which are called methods. In some languages, they also call them functions, but when it's in the context of object-oriented, it's a method. And then at the top, you have properties. C#, as I said in my previous tutorial, has actually a definition of a field and a property. So let's talk about what a field is. A field is something that helps describe more information about the object we're working with. I'm going to make a field private string name. And so if you think of this as a real world thing, if you have a car, your car might have a name like Bessie or Bertha or Kirby. So this is just something that I might use to store a value. And C# and any other language has something called variables. Properties are like variables that are associated with an object. This right here, I'll go into more depth in a future tutorial, but suffice it to say, a field is probably going to have the word private or the word protected in front of it. And visibility of methods and properties, that's something that, you know, more advanced, but when you're working with something that you only want to use within this class, it's private. If you want to make something available to everybody, you call it public. Public string, public name, something like that. So this is saying that this is something that's available to the public. Now, as I said, C# has the distinction between a field and a property. Properties are conceptually slightly different, but not too different. And I don't really want to go into that in a beginner tutorial. So what I will do is just say a property is something like a public variable, but then you have these things called getters and setters. So you can actually get or set the value in a specific way in your programming language. Again, this is just a quick rundown of what you see in C# script. I will go into more of this later. So a class has properties or fields that are used to describe that class. And then we have methods, which are used to take action on those. Inside the method, you can do a lot of things. So you can do statements like an if statement. This is logical. If name equals Joe. You can do things that are called loops. You can do variable assignments like string Wallaber equals an awesome developer. If you all don't know Wallaber, you should check him out. I'll put a link in the description below. There's lots of things that you can do inside of methods. For future tutorials, I will talk a little bit more about what you can do. But when you're reading code, you can know that if you see something that starts with void or string or int or public string start or whatever, public string my method, public string go home, something that starts with public or void or string, this is an action that gets taken on the object. Now, you'll also notice that when I put something like string there rather than void, it is going to want me to return something. So this is saying when this action is called, I want something returned to me. So in this case, I will just say return Wallaber. Wallaber is very returnable. More of how this works will come in future little vignette tutorials. However, this is really meant just as a quick orientation of C# script as a whole. And these are things that you can also Google if you want to understand what a return statement is or what a string is. However, when you look at this, you know, okay, I see public void something, that's an action. And that's an action that my object takes. And in Unity, those are actions that happen when the game is playing. And while I covered this in the last tutorial, I will quickly look up at the top here. In my previous tutorial, I said that when you are trying to do something in your code, you may need to use things. There are other objects in your coding world that you might need to make use of. And if you do, there's going to be a using statement at the top. Unity has a bunch of default things that it needs, and so every mono behavior you create gets one of those things. However, there might be other things you see in tutorials that you may also want to include at the top. How objects get used, how you do if statements, and how you call them, that will come in the next tutorial. This is, again, just a quick orientation on some of the component parts of an object, so you can understand a little bit more when you look at code, and it hopefully doesn't look quite as scary. Oh, and one more thing. If you look at this thing called mono behavior, this is like saying, my car is a Toyota. It's saying that whatever constitutes a Toyota vehicle, that's a parent of it. So a parent is just me saying this object in the universe is actually a parent to the thing that I'm creating. And this object has a lot of functionality that I can also use within my code. So that's it for now. This was really, really quick, really intended as just a quick look at how syntax works and some of the keywords and basic functionality that you might see in an object. For future tutorials, I will actually show some functioning code, and I'll talk a little bit more of how it works within the coding system. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time. All right. I think we're ready. Well, we're almost ready. No music? Too bad. Got Unity. I've got Unity on a string, sitting on a rainbow. Things that are really... I gotta stop saying really important. I watched my videos. It's like, oh my gosh, I say really important all the time. Oh! When you want to code and your brain is fried, try Lipton Pure Leaf Tea. It will unfry your brain just like that. Oh! That's right. Show up early to my stream and you get teacher mode Mottzy.